Great. Thank you.
And thanks for Maya Zuckerman. Thanks for joining us
Thank
to
you.
talk about the work that you've been doing, and give us an opportunity to talk about regeneration and the coordination in cities. So, and I'm just going to turn it over to yourself. Maybe introduce yourself a little bit, just for people who end up watching the recording. And
great.
Yeah.
Thanks, David, and thanks you for reaching out and asking me to do this. Always enthralled with the work here. And it is the work of collaboration, and it's the work, I believe it's the most important work. Oh, there's Bobby and Hannah, yay. So just a little bit about myself. I'm currently running ops for a startup called Hollow. They're a distributed cloud services company. We're a pre-beta company. Our framework is called HoloChain. And basically what we're trying to do is create an alternative to AWS. And one of the projects that is really interesting that is building with our framework is called the Internet of Energy and RedGrid, which is building a distributed grid, renewable energy grid. So that's where our framework could be really powerful. And it's not a product that you can hold or a specific app. It's really the framework and the way people can actually build on that. Think about it like an app store. And the technology, the operating system underneath it, but it's fully distributed ledger, and it's a really interesting place right now, and it's very, very low on carbon emissions because it's not run on the blockchain. It's different, and it really is a system that is being built like a natural system. So we're using a lot of really interesting technology and interesting linguistics in the form of I'm probably gonna butcher it, but in the kind of cryptology of the development of these systems. So not going to talk too much about that today. I'm going to talk about something else I'm doing. So I'm currently enrolled and at the last kind of middle of my MBA, writing my MBA project for a university called Bradford out of the UK. They have been doing a circular economy MBA for about 5 or 6 years. They launched it with full partnership with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I know that the partnership is not as full right now because the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has launched their own educational, not an MBA, but kind of a lot of their own educational courses, which I'm also a graduate of. So I've done one of their 11-week courses last year. And I'm also participating in the Regenerative Economics with John Fullerton right now. And the framing of my MBA projects is very large, and I know it, and I tend to think in systems as a systems thinker. And it really looks at, on one part, what is this kind of concept of regenerative cities? And there are other concepts that are showing up. There's a lot of these where we want to go. There's a story of like, and that's why I put the background of the city behind me, of the city that I want to go to, I want to build. And on the other side, there is where we are right now, multiple stakeholders trying to change things on a city level. And the biggest issue that I'm seeing and also has come up as part of the SDG 17, part of it is talking about partnership for implementing the other SDGs is collaboration. And what I looked at is what is enduring collaboration between stakeholders to actually implement these solutions, and what is the enablers, what are the barriers. And the way I'm framing kind of my whole MBA is I'm really starting very big with the whole concept of what are the frameworks and models for emerging cities, whether sustainable, regenerative, circular, thriving cities, cities with nature. There's all of these different memes that are out there, and the different thought leaders that are leading these different efforts. Who are the stakeholders in these cities? And in the beginning, I only went with the public-private, but now I've actually added the commons and also nature as a stakeholder. And then how do they collaborate? And what is out there in the field that has been successful on large-scale collaboration? What are the pitfalls, barriers, enablers, and maybe better ways of collaborating? And because it's not a problem solution set, it's collaborations are things that happen in nature. We all, like, nature collaborates in a very deep level. And how do we actually emulate that in a city? And then how do we look at it from the perspective of now versus a perspective of like 20 years from now? Like, how do we actually do this on the ground, which is very much my work as an entrepreneur and my work as an operation lead, I've been COO, is I take big visions and then I ask the questions and how do we start on Monday? Because we have to have these big visions of where we're wanting to go, but we also have to be very pragmatic on what we can actually do. And then we got to actually have that negotiation between those two places. And I think the last thing I'll say before I can open up, I can talk more, I've done a lot of research, is that my belief, and this is why I'm writing about this, is at this point in this part in the human story in our civilization, I believe we have all the money, we have all the brains, we have probably all the technology and some of the technology coming, yet we're still here. And we're still not seeing the change that we need to see in a rapid way. And that is behavior and collaboration. And I also really believe in cities. As I'm seeing what is happening in cities across the world, I'm seeing that cities are big enough and complex enough to create change on a large scale, but small enough and in a frame that people understand. Any layperson will understand what a city is, even though they don't have the bigger semantics of like history of cities, etc. But when we say city, we can actually talk about the same thing. We can say, oh, in that city, in this city, versus if we say bioregions, we lose half the crowd or even more. If we say nation states, it's too big. But people have a lived experience of being in cities. And that's where the rubber meets the road. So it's actually a place we can actually see transitions happening, not even in our lifetime, but like within short amounts of time. And I think we've all had that visceral experience during COVID, very specific things that happen in San Francisco, for instance, where I live, open streets. Some places call it patios, we call it parklets, where people could sit outside to eat, like those kind of changes that happen like within 3 months. So it's things we can actually see changing around us. And that's where I'm like, this is the place with better collaboration is enabled, or more of an opening for collaboration is enabled. That is where I see the biggest changes can happen. And they are happening. It's like, I want to push them to the next level. And I also want to address elephants in the room and address barriers and address what's missing as part of my research. So that's kind of a little bit on this. Yeah, and I'm looking at Hannah's remark, yeah, and David's. Yeah, and nature is a stakeholder. I'm actually bringing it from a scientific side of like biodiversity in cities, and there's indexes for that right now. So if we're actually seeing that nature is a stakeholder in a city, how do we even bring nature to the table or be invited by nature to its table in the city? And what does that mean for us? And also little things that have emerged in some of my conversations and research about animals coming back to the city, because if they are in an agriculture area, they don't have enough food. So in the city, they actually have more biodiversity of plants, so they can come and eat, which is a really interesting change. So how do we empower that more? So that's kind of the bigger framework of what I'm operating with. And I can go deeper, or I can just halt and kind of give people some time to digest, ask me questions. I'm open to anything at this point.
I know I've got a question. I'll start with Maya. I've been wondering about the history, like who's done this before, kind of, and like, so what are you looking back to for reference? I mean, I was thinking particularly like there's a bunch of community development research that's been done over the decades. Is that useful in your thinking?
Yeah, community development. I mean, Jane Jacobs, like those, and even in kind of contracts to Kobe and why Kobe is not like for me, not the right approach for cities. There's a lot of sustainability history, even like when like there was a regenerative cities. I mean, it's new history, but regenerative cities like documentation from 2010. Like when is it actually even the framing of regenerative cities? Like I couldn't find a lot of it before 2010 in my research, but I found a document, like a really interesting in-depth document. And I'm happy to extract my current literature list, which is over 100 pieces, to kind of like show what I'm looking at. And I'm not going to go deep history, but because I really want to. Otherwise, it's never going to get done, and I have 15,000 words. So, that's kind of where I'm looking. But I'm also looking into like circular economies history, sustainability, kind of like to circular economy history, of course, comes in from like cradle to cradle and sustainability and blue economy and natural capitalism and all of these things. So, and then regeneration. When was the word started being used for cities? Because regeneration is a big word and it means a lot of things, but more specifically around cities. And that's like not before 2010, or maybe there's some stuff before that, very hard to find. So it is actually an interesting emergent meme. And who's been using it? And the idea, and why do we see these kind of different models? We see like circular cities, we see donut cities, we see, can we actually agree that we're basically talking about similar things? But I think with regenerative cities, and one of the things that was very interesting for me in the workshop that I led with 5 other people, is that what we don't know about regenerative cities is because it's something we've never been to. It's a new form of city. Like if we're talking about modern cities versus ancient cities, and also the needs of cities to be reinvented to deal with and mitigate with our climate crisis. Like, is it still a city if it's Miami and now it's basically looks like Venice, right? Venice, Italy, not Venice, LA. So there's a lot of really interesting questions that have come up from there.
And what characterizes a regenerative city?
I don't know. I'm still in research, because that I don't want to just say, oh, it's this or it's that, because regeneration is emergent. We're talking about a system, but one of the things that I'm seeing that keeps showing up is a city that is conducive to promote livability and conducive for life. So like the concept of regenerative agriculture, that you're actually letting the soil rebuild itself and supporting its self-regeneration. That's what a city can actually become, but from an aspect of how we are in relationship to nature. So I don't want to tightly define it, because even with circular economy, there's 137 definitions. There's some alignment. And like, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is kind of the leader in that conversation. But, all of these other framings don't want to give it too much of a tight frame, because cities are complex adaptive systems. When you actually look at the history of like the urban development and what is a city, there's a lot of scholarly arguments of what does actually mean a city. Is like, when do we know a city is really in a border, unless it's just an arbitrary border and we decided that that's where the border of the city is, like in like the county of San Francisco, right? Gil, you wanted to say something?
Maya, why is it important to you to come up with a definition?
Oh, it's not
city, much less city. I mean, a lot of what you've been talking about is, what does it mean? What is the term? When was it used? The concept's been around for a long time, even though the term is relatively new.
Yeah. No, it's not important. I think one of the things I want to say is that here's all the different thoughts around it. Mm-hmm. Let's agree that there is interest in this. And I think the interest of what a regenerative city, I think, is, and what I'm seeing is like more of a internal interest of people to live in a place that is good, like livable, beautiful. Like I've got a lot of like those words where people are actually want to live in a place that they love, want to have a place that they feel safe, want to live in a place that is thriving. And those are the words. And it's very hard to define what that is. So if we're saying that that's kind of and of course there's metrics of like, oh, we want to reduce CO2, we want to have more biodiversity. There's, those other things. This is kind of where it actually aligns. And then the question is, so how do these multi-stakeholders collaborate better? And the framing is enduring collaboration, because just to collaborate, and us living in Silicon Valley, to come up and do an awesome one-day experience and then disappear, there's not enduring collaboration. Enduring collaboration needs this kind of continuous work that takes time and is long. And I think that is a change in our behavior as cities, as people, to actually start thinking in that way. It's thinking long term. And that's part of like what I'm looking for, is like best practices, frameworks, things that can support people along the way. Hannah, you wanted to ask something?
Yeah, as you know, this is a topic that really fascinates me. So thank you. Yeah, I've got a little list of contacts that I'm making that I think you would be interested in. Different people have done research around this and whatnot, but I'm curious, like for modern day stuff, if you've found examples in like, I think even China and other like Malaysian cities that are really looking to be as sustainable as possible. And then also like Dubai, they're trying to be very innovative. And I know there was supposed to be a huge conference around it, but I think COVID might have stopped that. And then also like the eco-village movement. And even though that's still smaller, but to be seeing like best practices and stuff. And from especially like Denmark. In fact, we were going to go speak and bring permaculture to a conference there, and right as COVID shut everything down. And so it was like, oh, I was literally on my way. So yeah, I'm curious what modern examples you've found that can kind of help give you ideas.
Yeah, there's a lot of modern examples of like people are trying to create kind of the perfect environment, like the Masdar, or eco villages, etc. But what I'm really interested is the built environment that is here and transitioning it. So on that side, I'm kind of looking at kind of the donut city, like Amsterdam and Portland, and kind of like basically saying, hey, we are the city that's already here and we can transform. And within that, there's kind of, when you start drilling down into kind of, let's call it verticals, even though I prefer not to go too much into the verticals, there are a lot of really interesting initiatives from, C40 has been leading a lot of these initiatives, but the group that I'm involved with a little bit, the Global New Mobility Coalition, is looking specifically at transportation. So things like the 15-minute city projects like Paris and a few other places, which is also kind of hand in hand, in my view, the concept of zero emission areas in cities. And because it's not just like reducing emissions, it's also bringing in walkable, livable, thrivable areas. It's encouraging multimodal transportation, but it's also encouraging removing some streets, adding more vegetation, adding more parks. So it is that kind of like reversing with,
production part of that too.
Sorry?
Like more food production within the
food
city.
production, vertical, like urban agriculture, urban farming, water retention, and like all of those like techniques are part of it. For me, the thing that is most interesting is I want to see cities that have fully built transition versus the eco villages are lovely, but I'm a very half the earth kind of person. I'd rather people just like leave it to the indigenous to lead and not trample on, pristine, beautiful jungle to create more eco villages. I'd like them to bring those same solutions into the city and make those eco cities.
Have you looked at Transition Town?
Yeah.
Because they try to have like checklists and where to start in transitioning. So, okay, great.
And also looking at what is already being done, like what are the initiatives and how do you weave those initiatives? And that's why I brought in, circular cities have a lot of these initiatives on how do you make a city more circular. And I'm saying, well, there's certain things that are missing there, like the social aspect, like the equity aspect, like the biodiversity aspect. So, what is missing from that model that should be here? And the donut and the regenerative models are starting to actually include more of that relationship, because they go beyond just the circular conversation, even though when you actually look at like the latest Ellen MacArthur wording and framing, they're moving more towards including biodiversity, including jobs, and kind of like really looking at the society as well. So the interesting thing, and I think it's a great indicator, is that more and more complexity is being adopted by these different groups, saying, oh, we can't just like be so reductive. We need to actually think beyond just the reducing CO2, just the recycling. We need to add all of these extra R's. So if the circular economy is reduce, reuse, remanufacture, recycle, then I think the regenerative cycle, the regenerative city might add the restore, reconcile, and regenerate. So what are the other things that are missing there, and kind of how do we build that in, and also how do we make this not overwhelming? Like, where do people actually even interact in this? If they're the commons, how does the commons come and support this? How do they come in partnership with the different policymakers and government agencies? How do they influence the business sector? Just a kind of anecdote, I was on a call with the SF Environment and Ecology groups here, and they were doing a very small, we're 20 people, workshop called Zero Waste Heroes. So that's like empowering people that either are like, there was a renter. I am part of an HOA here of 15 units. And then there was a woman that was working with the Golden State Warriors arena. And so those kind of different, and somebody was working in Salesforce building on their way. So kind of empowering these different groups of people that are, maybe some of them are more focused on zero waste, and some of them are like, well, I live in a house, so there's waste. And how do we actually empower more of the conversation and meet the people who are doing that in the city? So I felt that was like a very nice offer from the city to just sit down and have that conversation. We're a city of just under 800,000, and we were 20 people, and they do this every 3 months. So, that is not even that is part of like the indication of how do we make this more fun and more inviting for more people to participate. That's a great kind of like, well, you did such a great job. Can we do more of this? And what are the other places where people can interact? So that's kind of part of it. And again, it's like, how do you take, so I'm very much not a reductionist, which is very hard for me to write very specific small business projects. I'm very much a systems thinker. So how do you take the system and then think about where can people plug in a way that empowers them, in a way that it makes sense? So, yeah.
And how are you going to be presenting your information? I mean, I know you do so much creative work with media and your book series and everything, besides just like your dissertation.
Yeah, so 15,000 word dissertation. And then I'm going to do probably just one webpage a few years ago, I did this model called the Regenerative Entrepreneur Leader, where it was just a blueprint of workshopping of what a leader can do to actually think through becoming more of a regenerative, or on the pathway to regeneration. So I'm going to use the same model to actually do that for the city. And what I'm thinking is just do links where we start with nature in the center, and then we kind of grow. I can even show this real quick. Probably need, let me share screen quickly if I can. I think I can. Yeah, there we go. So this is my old model. So I'm thinking of doing something similar, putting it on a web page, and then having links to each level. And each level would be a list of, here's all the frameworks that I found, here's all the toolkits. But with the idea that nature's in the middle, so, something like that. I'm not sure if it's going to be exactly this model, but and make it clickable. Yeah, if I have time. That's why I'm like, what can I do? Can I do this in an hour if I have all the links? I can probably produce this in an hour, but probably the image will take me a week to do. All right, so that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. And then really look at some kind of recommendations. I mean, what they're looking for in the project is not solution, but recommendations. So what can we recommend? Like, what can I recommend for people to look at? So for me, it's like, I'm not going to have all the answers. Absolutely not. I think for me is more presenting the findings in a way that people can interact and learn and kind of go on their own learning journey, and hopefully for city to kind of go, oh, here's another resource we can use, or we can give our partners to kind of think through in a way that's like easy to click and easy to kind of navigate to a point, as much as I can do by September, and kind of understand that. I think the other thing for me is really how do we simplify a complex system of a city and simplify this idea in a way that is approachable, because right now that's the hardest thing, especially even moving from linear to circular. Most people get hung up on all kinds of things around it, and it's really hard unless you kind of go into the deep dive and understand how some of these solutions work. Like, how do you interfere in loops in a circular economy? It's not actually that intuitive. I mean, for us, probably it is, people sitting here in this conversation, but when I thought I was doing a good job explaining circularity, people still think it's recycling, which is a problem. So. Oh yeah.
Can you give a couple of examples of the collaboration you're looking for, Maya? What kinds of things are you seeing?
So public-private partnerships are things I'm seeing. Some really interesting cross collaborations that I've actually talked with one friend around, maybe not even city, there's actually kind of a county level between large organizations like Google, the environment department of the county, this is Santa Clara, the mayors of the area, policy leaders, and kind of the environmental organizations, so like nonprofits. So that's one of the things I've seen that's really interesting. I'm not seeing enough kind of the crossover to commons. And I think that is a huge mistake. I think that's one of the things that there are places, but they're not, people don't know about it. Like, people are not aware and they're not excited. And I'm like, what's there? Like, why are we not excited? Of course, all of us are busy as well. And then another place that's really interesting is I did talk to SF Environment, and there is a huge collaboration between SF Environment and these other startups that come in and kind of present. And I presented as an academic, very, very open to it. It's actually wonderful to see. And also their relationship with other nonprofits like the Sierra Clubs, et cetera, and the way they actually work together on ordinances and bylaws to actually support circularity and other initiatives like that. And again, that's a place where, like, I wish more of the public knew that is happening. The more I've dug into the relationships and the kind of the transition that happened in ecology, a lot of these things are online. Like, you can find a lot of these topics and you're seeing the relationships, you're seeing the collaboration, but most people are not aware of it. So I am actually really privy to some of that. Because of my relationship with the Global New Mobility Coalition, which is part of WEF, World Economic Forum, I'm also seeing their work in large collaborations, which has been phenomenal to see. And then where the big collaborations are happening is C40 is one of the more interesting organizations out there. There used to be only 40 mayors. Now it's like 180 of the biggest cities in the world, San Francisco included, Bay Area, a lot of cities in the Bay Area, Oakland, I believe, Berkeley, I believe. And the relation, what I also heard, this is something I heard not from the C40, but I heard from SF Environment and their relationship with other cities, is they're open to actually collaborate. They actually pick up the phone to each other and ask them about policy for the environment, and people are very open to share that information. So there is that collaboration on that level. So, where is this working and where it's not working is part of my interest. And also, where do large organizations help, whether they're whether they're nonprofit or large organizations like, Google, et cetera. And where do startups, because one of the question came up because one of the interesting things for me as somebody who's worked in startups is a lot of the language and narrative in startups is like, oh, nobody gets it. We're going to go and disrupt it because it's not working. And the reality is it's not completely true always. Sometimes it is true, and sometimes we need the innovators, but not in every case. And to not have a way to harness the wonderful power of innovation and the kind of outside thinking in service to something bigger, I think is we're losing a lot of energy, we're losing a lot of great ideas, we're losing a lot of money. And how do we actually support that kind of better collaboration, letting the innovators, pioneers do their thing, break some stuff, because that's what they're going to do, but putting it in a more holistic way. And there is a model called the Dutch, it changed its name, but it's like the Dutch School of Sustainability. And it actually looked at, in a collaboration for sustainability, specifically in city level, how do you actually incorporate the pioneers, innovators in a way that supports them, and then the policymakers, and then that kind of transition from the wave of like innovation into kind of more of a, not growth, but actually sustaining. Like, we got to a level of development, and then you actually work on maintaining and sustaining that before there's an entropy. And this is versus, any kind of innovation. But specifically for sustainability, and that was a model from, I think, early 2010s, maybe even a little bit earlier than that.
I mean, again, I'd be really curious. I mean, if you didn't force the word regeneration, which I think is a reasonably new framing, but you looked for regenerative behavior, kind of, or you looked for collaboration and coordination. Yeah. I think in cities, we've been trying to do coordination for a long, long time. And I'm trying to think of, like business improvement districts, or, South Bank, right? We've been, like building a community bank whose goal is to like cross invest, or community block grants from the government. I feel like we have a number of devices that are intended to promote collaboration and coordination. And I'm kind of interested in knowing if regeneration adds anything to that, if there's something that was missing from those designs. And, if there's is there a regenerative collaboration we've missed? But, I feel like we're being a little disdainful of some of the history, because we didn't invent this shit. People have been working on it for a while.
Exactly. Well, and it's also like the reason why I'm bringing kind of the framing of a regenerative city, and because that's like our vision and mission, because we can collaborate, but what are we collaborating for? Where are we going? And I think that's part of the conversation, that even with like, the CO2 reduction or GHG reduction removal, it's like, great. Are we going to be building all these technologies that are going to be able to suck the CO2 in the world to keep on the same world that we have? Is this really the world we want to live in? And like, if we don't actually know where we're going or have a shared vision, we're going to just recreate this again and again. Like, not that I believe that there's going to be a magic moment where we're all going to come together, and like, that's not going to happen. But are there mechanisms to start actually really asking people, and like they did in Amsterdam, like, where do you want to go? And what are you willing to do for that? And having people, and I'm saying kind of large people, it could be the peoples, the private, public, common sector, nature, etc., indigenous people as well, actually have a say in where we're going. Because I think the disempowerment that we have, and also the alienization sometimes that we feel in cities, is because we're just like found ourselves there, and sometimes people leave, right? But if there is a feeling that we have no ability to change anything, I think that kind of creates more of that stress and alienization and depression that we're seeing everywhere. But if there's actually a shared values and shared vision of where we're going, and then, okay, so how do we make that happen? That connection feels really empowering to me. That's something I'm really interested in, something I'm, as somebody who's worked in so many teams, well, we have a vision. How do we get there? Startups kind of know how, like, we fail, we work, we test, so we can do it on smaller levels. Well, how do you do it on a bigger level, like a city? Have we ever asked the question, where do we want to go? And then in my interview this morning that I did, I'm almost at the end of my interview series, just because of lack of time. And my actually friend suggested another stakeholders to be generations down the line, people who have not been born yet, the future generations. Are we asking them what kind of city do they want to be born in? And it's a big question. Like, I'm not going to have all the answers, but I think what I want to, at the end of this, I want to create some recommendations of where to start.
I just was going to chime in. I think it's a marvelous topic. I think the regenerative can also be a metaphorical placeholder for apex in this, that, or the other. And so apex in lifelong learning, you'd say Kerala, right? They have the highest level of lifelong learning. Apex in utilization of artificial lighting for antidepressive urbanism, Helsinki has won awards on that for now 15 years, right? Apex of deliberative democracy, there's lots of potential in each apex dimension, right? And if we take a positive deviance index of every city of the world that has gotten to an apex that is an order of magnitude better than the rest of the world. There is a city in the Netherlands that mines all their gold, silver, steel, iron, platinum from old cell phones and old electronics and from the waste of the other parts of the country. There's an apex there, right? Like we've had a example in San Francisco at the hackathon a decade ago where they were talking about how San Francisco has been just short of lemon independence. We grow so many lemons here. What is the independence of each vegetable or fruit one at a time, or each apex one at a time? So I do think there's a question of saying, like, do you really need an index of all the apexes that are worth aspiring to, and then clusters of those apexes? And then you don't have the SDGs for cutting each problem society faces in half, but you have the aspiration goals that seem inspirational enough to make it feasible.
I think that's really cool, Bobby. It's like, how do you orient towards the potential as opposed towards the problem?
Yeah, and it really is aligned with where I'm going, because how do we align closer to where we want to go versus just solving all problems? Because that's part of the issue, is we keep just trying to like solve the CO2 problem, solve this problem. And it's like, well, where do we want to go? And if we are going to a thrivable, if Kate Roas talks about, I'm actually even quote her because it's a good quote here. So she talks about a question about from downsizing the donut to the city level is like, how can your city become a home to thriving people and a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? And I can copy paste that. And that's a great kind of question to organize around. I think that's part of it, is like, how do we organize around some of these questions, and then bring in, okay, these are the models that can help us get there. These are some of the economical models. These are sustainability models. These are, biodiversity models. All of those things start actually moving towards that city versus just going, well, I just need to remove that amount of CO2. Because we now know that, yes, it's very important to remove the CO2 and GHG, but not just by creating, air miners, carbon sequestration devices, but actually creating native forests. And there's all these other, like the fast growing forests as well within cities, creating more spaces for biodiversity. The knowledge now that a whale is so much more valuable alive than dead because they're one of the biggest carbon sinks on the planet, is part of that conversation. So how do we creating the oceans that are conducive for healthy whale population? Because that's part of part of this. So I think it is a very different question that is very much arriving in a lot of the different forums that I'm in, and a lot of the different educational spaces, including the regen economics, is really looking at the questions from a different perspective and the pull from a different perspective, like Bobby said.
Well, I'll jump in again until if somebody else wants to jump in, please interrupt me. But I'm excited to learn more. One of the things that I've found, like, I thought was like a big step for me, was kind of like being so excited about regenerative agriculture and kind of the cascading benefits example of regenerative agriculture. And then, talking to farmers and realizing how hard it was to get people around them to actually kind of internalize the experience, to thinking, well, if you really wanted to have kind of a regenerative future, it has to happen at a larger scale. And I think you've chosen cities as the scale. I'm still, I would still talk about bioregions or watersheds or something like that as the kind of the unit of analysis, if you will. But I think they're a nice kind of they work congruently. But I guess it feels to me one of the problems in a watershed is kind of a simultaneous investment problem often, right? If you could get the farmer, or you could get the resort to subsidize the farmer, you might not get the same level of pollution, and you might get better food. I don't know, but somehow that negotiation is really difficult to do in our normal markets. So to me, I would love magically to be able to have coordination kind of, within the biosphere. Are you seeing kind of insights around that for the cities, that kind of mechanisms to enhance coordination? That
Yeah, I mean, here's kind of like talking to the city and then talking to other stakeholders is really interesting. The city needs to have the mandate for collaboration, because when the city says, so basically the cities as facilitators, or city governments as facilitators, is something that needs to happen, because otherwise, kind of like everybody throws it around as a hot potato. Oh, whose responsibility is this? And I really believe that it should be the city, and the city knows that. So, but in the city, like specifically, I talked to like San Francisco, and I'm trying to talk to a couple other cities, including Rotterdam. So I'm hoping to get some of their perspective on that. Is that if there isn't a mandate from the city, it's probably going to be harder to do. But when the city mandates these collaborations, people show up. So what I'm more seeing, a city needs to facilitate and be empowered to facilitate and kind of just own it, or at least get the money to sponsor an external facilitator if that is needed. So yeah, I think that's something that was raised, because even with a different group that was doing a lot of facilitation, they said if the city or the region is not giving us the mandate and empowering us to do it, we can't do that. So that's part of it, and that's like one of the big kind of aha of like who owns like the RACI model. So who's responsible, who's accountable, who's communicated, and who's informed. And that accountability and responsibility is really important, and that's part of like just working, like, this is what I do at work all the time. Well, who's captain on this? Like, who's lead? And it doesn't need to be the same people, but the city can facilitate and not be responsible. But when the city like really holds that to happen, it happens. And that's kind of the difference between just good ideas to actually long enduring collaborations.
I stuck a quote in from this Keynes biography I'm reading about.
Okay. Yeah, I'm reading
the
that.
role of cities and private sectors, and just again pointing out that he was writing, I guess, in 1925 or something.
Yeah.
So these issues that circulate.
I mean, these issues are old issues, and the reason I kind of went into it is because it's a wicked problem. I'm interested in wicked problems, and it's a wicked problem that when we do better, we all do better. That's the thing. And when you actually see these amazing collaborations, whether they're spontaneous or not, that have created amazing stuff. I mean, they can also create horrific things as well. But when you're actually seeing a held container of collaboration and what that can create, like, my experience of held containers is like things like Burning Man. That's a held container. And like within it, you can go wild and it's amazing and people still are holding and you can create so much. Other places is, there have been places where areas were designated for the commons and invited for the commons to use, and what happens there. Or even the very small things like what happened, I come back to it because it's so visceral. We had COVID, we closed down our streets. Some of the streets have continued to close down 2 years later every weekend. And what that created for people, the fact that they can walk on their own streets, so they take back their commons, they actually feel like the fabric of their city is much more vibrant. I have never seen San Francisco so vibrant. This weekend we had the Hanky Jesus, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. I don't remember another time that it was that packed and vibrant. There was like no room because everybody was there. And that is an indicator of we've created a space that is the commons, like a park, that we all are part of it. We all want to be there. And what does it do to a city that we feel that kind of responsibility, not responsibility, but kind of part of belonging to that area? Responsibility probably less, but the great thing is the city then is coming after us to clean after us, which is, also part of it. It's also part of like knowing that you're taken care of, and that is huge. Not that there's perfection in anything here, but you kind of see the indicators, and then you ask the question of like, well, if that happens, what else can we do? Knowing the predicament we are in, and also knowing how much work needs to be done in cities and in areas. Great thing we're recording this.
We got there's somebody's listed as iPhone, and you
thought that
put
was
something in
Bobby.
the chat. Is that Bobby?
I think it's both Bobby and iPhone.
Bobby, are you
yes,
on
I'm
Bobby is iPhone.
I'm well, I do not like to think of my identity as iPhone. That sounds like a rather less than optimal narrative of my identity. If I am reduced to iPhone as identity, please do not think of me as an accoutrement or a digital smart appendage. Please interface with me to get to a solar punk future rather than to distort your present day reality such that the regenerative future of cities does not feel plausibly accessible via the yellow brick road we fashioned together in cahoots. So
Bobby, remember, we also means we want to touch you hundreds of times a day.
Yellow brick road gets to be the paving. I think the layer of what are the dimensions of, apexes of collaboration for regenerating cities is, I think, really interesting. Like Strive Cincinnati got $8 billion of incremental spending upgrade through collective impact reduction, duplication of spending. And if we take the Creative Cities Wallonia example of underutilized history, ancient history that they want to combine for modern reinvention, I think that the potential is profound. But I think basically the breakdown is big talks to small badly almost all of the time. Large institutions do not create platforms for small organizations. I do think there's a counterexample to this in Story Bellows' amazing work at the Institute for New Urban Mechanics in Philadelphia, where they let anyone bid on any piece of any government contract of any kind. And we're just like, okay, tell us what you could do better than anyone else, more efficiently than anyone else, and we will super prime and reintegrate the bids. Like that was actually supposedly working for a while, but like that has been such a complicated thing to do that it's never even been emulated. And I haven't even seen a case study of it because they were saying it was such a chaotic process that they didn't even know how to turn it into a case study, because actually reintegrating the bids from all the small providers was the right thing to do, and something that governments haven't been structured for or adapted to. So I think the question of like, can cities purchase things based on value created. Outcome-based budgeting only happens rarely in America and globally. And so I think the idea of, advanced market commitments from cities don't really exist. Public-private sector crossover AMCs don't exist. So I think the question is saying, like, how do policy get integrated to values, get integrated to optionality of the opportunities for action in public-private partnerships, in individual sector, intra-sector work is still more chasm than examples that are proof positive that transformational autonomy and agency are reclaimable at a urban level. But I'd love to see it get there.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of like that area, the startup area, the innovator area is where there's like huge chasm and also huge kind of like alienization in when you speak to the different groups. It's like, oh, it's the startups over there, they think they know everything, and then startups, it's like, I don't want to deal with government. So there is a lot of that kind of narrative floating around, and I also work in the crypto area where it's even more pronounced, where now, but my company does work with regulators. Like, how do you actually work with regulators, et cetera? And like, nobody wants to do that, right? So and that also happened in the sharing economy, and specifically with things like moving from the beginning of things like Uber and Lyft were not regulated, and now they're starting to be regulated. Same thing with like micromobility. You had all these like scooters coming into cities and then leaving again, and then they came back when they actually worked with the city. So there is actually, I would say, like, there are certain places where it does happen, but it usually happens after things break and not before. And that's a shame, because the amount of, not even just like human energy, but like the waste of resources that happens because people are not speaking to each other, and groups are not speaking, and sectors are not speaking to each other, is monumental. And the interesting thing that some of the solutions that framings like the circular economy can help with is closing those loops, because you are then required to speak to other sectors when things move between sectors, because you're not just doing a make waste, make use waste, a linear economy. You're actually trying to pick those materials back into the loop. You're trying to actually do something, get more value out of those materials. So you actually are needing to talk to the people down the stream from you, versus being used to only get the stuff from them and then not ever communicating with them again. So I think circularity is part of where we actually start having the business need to communicate better between the sectors, because you're changing the way business is being done. And then how do we actually do that with cities? Well, part of the places that I'm looking into, interfering into the loops of cities, is in those places of like where it used to be a linear economy, it's transitioning to a circular economy, and now you need to actually talk to people again. You actually have to change behavior of customers. That's the common sector, or the way they interact with things. You have to change the way you interact with big business and small business, because you're changing the way they interact with waste management, they interact with transportation, because the city has changed, and the way what the city is offering is changed, or what is offered in the city is changed. Transportation, for instance, moving from everybody owning to multimodal, micromobility, mobility as a service, things like that, and how does the city interact in those kind of solutions? So that's another place. And that's why this is complex, and trying to narrow it down. And this is still something that will happen probably in the next 4 months, as I'll start narrowing it into what am I actually finding, but I'm still in this kind of very broad spectrum of looking at a lot of aspects of this.
We've been kind of capturing on Jared or Arlene, Marna, Jean-Marc, any last words or thoughts or suggestions?
I've got to jump in about 30 seconds for another call, but fascinating discussion. Thank you for creating this container Hannah was the one who pulled me into this. So thanks, Hannah. And yeah, looking forward to continuing the conversation in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. Do I have all the information? Yeah.
I'm sorry he wasn't able to introduce his project more. A few of us know about him, but Jared's working on starting as a podcast series leading into a TV series, really looking at this, what is like the regenerative city and all of these details.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so I wanted him to be able to see this. And yeah, I think that what you're talking about as your finished product will be so beneficial for especially other media makers and helping really have some more concrete ideas behind their inspiration. And yeah, looking to a solar punk future and the regenerative future that so many of us are moving towards, that this will be a huge asset. So thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just glad to be here. I'm glad you're doing this work, and it's nice to meet you. Sorry, I've had to be kind of in and out, but hi, my name is Marna, and it's a long road to the world we all want to see, and I'm glad to be allies with you on it. Thanks for doing the inquiry and putting in the steps, and let's continue exploring it and creating and ideating and discovering what works together.
Thank you. This is my email if people want to connect with me, but and Jean-Marc, like I still don't have all the tools. I'm collecting them. That's something that hopefully in the next 5 to 6 months, I'll have a dashboard of some of the tools that I've collected and how we can use them. So yeah, so thank you.
No, it's great. Yeah, if you ever want to collaborate on a list of this, definitely, I think that's what the GRC does. And yeah, I'm an avid collector of tools myself and builder of tools. I work for Regen Villages and.
Oh, great. So please send me some things.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I will, like anything that I use, I will cite. So it's not, you know, as an academic, I cite everything. I try to have to give the fairness of that, etc. So
awesome.
Yeah. Thank you. If there's no more any questions, and David, if you don't mind sending me the file once you have it.
I just was going to say I would love there to be a toolkit for any community to turn their city from a non-regenerative city to a regenerative city, and if they can start wherever they are and get to where they'd wish to go, that would be marvelous for the world. The self-directed regeneration of your community.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get something like that in 6 months, but that could be something a little bit longer term. But that's what I was hoping to get. But you know, it's complex. But please send me any resources, because the idea is like, if you're this, you can go here. Like, where do you start your journey? Because I think there's so many tools of like, how do you build something? So I'd love to support people in that journey and support city leaders in that journey. You know, San Francisco is very aware, but I'm sure there are other towns and cities that are not. And how do we support them in their journey to eclipse the Berkeleys and the Portlands? And, you know, we want them to do better. Great.
Maya, thank you so much. Yeah, so I'll post the video in the chat to the Slack. I can send you links and stuff if you don't want to access the Slack. And if there's any questions or anything we can be doing to contribute, like Jean-Marc is suggesting about tools or things, please, you know, be free to, you know, ask into the community. Let's see if we can lean in with you.
Yeah, I'd love that.
We're looking forward to updates.
Yeah, I might just send a spreadsheet if people want to just dump tools. Like, that would be amazing.
Yeah,
because
that's the easiest way right there for sure.
Yeah, so I'll do that once you yeah, I'll put, oh, lovely. There we go. I can see the whole link. So yeah, if you post, can I download, David, just a quick, can I download the video from the chat if you're sending it there?
When I put it on this, like, yeah, you should be able to download it as well.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I'm just asking for transcription. I transcribe everything. So
oh, smart. Yeah.
Yeah, well, for school, it's like really helpful.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Thank you for asking me to do this. This was awesome.
No, thanks for doing it. Thanks for a lot.
Yeah.
Great to see everybody. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Have a great day.